Right.
And we are recording. So welcome to the channel. I am Rob Tornstra, and I am your host for this conversation. It is my pleasure today to welcome to the channel Job, or as I think probably his fellow countrymen would say, Job.
Yeah.
And so Job and I got acquainted earlier this year through Paul Vanderklay, who is a mutual friend of ours. And it just so happened that Job was in Southern California on, I believe, work-related stuff. And I was in Southern California on work-related stuff. And we ended up having dinner together with Paul and a number of others, and just really enjoyed that conversation. And since that time, Job and I have had the opportunity to do a couple of other, at least one other conversation on YouTube, and we've had some interaction on an online server. And I have asked Job to be on the channel today because his story of working through questions of faith and unbelief, and does Christianity make sense, and other worldviews and other religions, has been a really interesting story for me, and just to hear it. And so I have asked him to come on the channel and just to share a little bit about that, and to listen to his story. So Job, again, welcome, and thank you for being on the channel today. And I'm going to just turn it over to you and have you share your story.
Thank you, Rob. I'll try to make it brief. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm 37 years old. And how far should I go back? It's difficult. I grew up in a loving family with a number of siblings. I'm the second child. It's the one after your parents have kind of figured out how to parent on the first one, and so.
And I'm the firstborn, so I'm the one where my parents were trying to figure it all out. So.
Yeah. I had a lovely childhood. My father was a school teacher, and my mom was a house mom. And I don't know. I went to elementary school, and I went to a school with the Bible. I came from a village in the Bible Belt, and it was a very conservative school. So I was really into dinosaurs. Loved dinosaurs. Was obsessed by them, and I would collect all these figurines and read all the books. And every holiday anywhere, I'd try to see if there was a museum anywhere or whatever, or a bookstore. But this was the type of school where, like in biology class, the chapter on prehistory was skipped. And because it mentioned dinosaurs and all that sort of stuff. So I wasn't allowed to do my, what's the English word for this? Like you have to do a project and then you have to present it in front of the class.
Yeah. Like a science project or something, yeah.
Yeah, you had to show that you could collect information and portray it. I wasn't allowed to do that on dinosaurs. That was interesting. And a particular thing that struck me in that time was there was a Bible reading every morning at school, and one of them is the story of I think it's Elijah on Mount Carmel with the priests of Baal, and where Elijah makes fun of Baal, like, oh, why isn't Baal showing up? Maybe he's on vacation, maybe he's on the toilet.
Yeah.
And then I think it's Josiah, he commands God to bring down fire, and my God's better than your God. And I remember feeling as a kid really bad for the priests of Baal, even though they didn't tell us what was actually done to those priests. I just felt really bad because, like, well, now he made them all feel bad, and they just believe what they believe, and it's not really their fault. And I would tell my mom, and my mom was like, well, these are stories from the Babylonian exile, and they tell these stories to explain things to each other, and it didn't really happen. Like, oh, okay. And combined with my dinosaur books, which I would bring to school to the teachers. See, it says here they did. I remember this. I was evangelizing paleontology to my school teachers.
Yeah,
We
right.
weren't really sure what to do with me. I was kind of a weird, nerdy kid, and I kind of never felt like I was part of the group, as nerd kids, you know, who would listen to this would understand. But I was diagnosed pretty young with depression. My parents took me to therapy. I didn't. I apparently I said things that I don't know what life is about and why are we here and what's the point of anything. And those are kind of weird thoughts for a kid to have. Yeah. But then, and I never really believed, you know, and I didn't really get a good feeling of a good impression of belief, given how constrictive my church was, my school was, and I had to go to church, and that also didn't help because I didn't feel like I really got anything from it. So there were a lot of fights in our household about having to go to church between me and my parents, and my mother wasn't particularly religious. She wanted to be a missionary when she was younger, but she kind of fell away from that. And my dad went to church, but he kind of went to church because that's what one does, not because he believes it, but community. And he was very involved. Like he's been even the leader of the church council at some point. So he was very involved in that way, but not because he particularly believes. But I still had to go because, well, it's my house, and if you're not live here, you got to go until you're 18. And then I turned 18, and I never went again. I stayed a part of the youth group because we had philosophical discussions, and and those were my friends. Yeah. And then, you know, we met once a month, and then somebody would have the task of portraying the subject. Like, okay, this is what we're going to discuss. Here are some statements. Let's talk about them. And those would be often about politics and morality. And when it was my turn, I brought up the problem of evil. And those were good discussions. That went on till I was like in my 20s. But I don't know, I went through high school. I definitely went through a period where I was very anti-theist. Obviously, I'm going to see the end of all this because I saw my own country desecularizing at a rapid rate. Clearly, we're in the Enlightenment age. Religion will be gone a couple of decades, maybe, and we will go to the glorious future where we won't be held back by the shackles of backwards wishful thinking. I read Hitchens. I didn't read Dawkins. I read his book on evolution, but I didn't read his book on God delusion.
Right.
I was active on a lot of online forums where I would debate with religious people. Those were good discussions because usually I was just kind of asking questions like, how do you explain this? And how do you explain that? How does this work? Which is mostly regarding the problem of evil and the utility of religion and, no rocket science, no new questions, but things that at that age I wrestled with. Which struck me because I mean, they often say atheists are angry at God, but I didn't believe God existed. I just didn't understand why people were religious because I saw people who are otherwise acting perfectly rational, except for that one part, which I was younger then. Okay, give me a break. But okay, where am I going? In high school, I got bullied to a degree that it was just hellish. Like high school kids can be really cruel. And I was just this nerdy kind of outcast kid and already struggling with depression. And I don't know, I kind of hung in there because I was too afraid to kill myself really. So, oh, my cat wants attention. Sorry, kitty. There she is. She's trying to get it on the lap, but there's a laptop here. Yeah. so that didn't work very well. And I kind of just struggled with that. And eventually you just kind of learn to deal with it. Like I remember at some point just walking home from visiting a friend, and I was just thinking, well, this is just what it's going to be. This is the brain I have. It's just gonna have to do, and I'm just gonna have to make this work, which was kind of interesting. I think I was like maybe 17, 18 when I sort of realized that. I don't know. I'm guessing how old I was. I just kind of remember when I was walking back home. It didn't help to keep the depression at bay, but like that kind of manifested to kind of that manifested in yeah, go ahead.
Just for clarity, so what was it that you were accepting at that point? Like what is it that you kind of felt like you just had to live with?
Oh, just that life was that way. Like it wasn't going to get any better. I was just, it was just like how Tolstoy says in his Confessions, like life was a cruel joke. Like there was no point to it, obviously. It's just, random matter in motion, and I just happened to suffer subjectively because the organism that I am. I was clearly a materialist back then. Like mechanistic, uncaring, cold universe. Like, why the hell wouldn't you off yourself? Yeah. There's no point to anything. Why the hell would I suffer?
Right.
So, I had a number of therapists. It didn't really help. So it did get better. Like you go out, you finish school, and you go to college. And I went to a trade school. It's not really college. I went to a trade school for IT. I wrote my first computer program when I was about 8. So, it was a thing I was kind of naturally good at. So I figured I might as well try to study that. And I got a job as a programmer. And it gets better, you get some more mature friends. The people there are more mature. They're more interested in a different type of relationship. I eventually got a girlfriend, which was actually a pen pal from America who I'd been writing with since I was 14.
Really?
I wrote my first letter to her when I was
no kidding.
When I was 14 in 1997. We've been married for 12 and a half years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I moved out of the house, things got better. This is why I said, how far should I go back? Because it's quite a big story, but I kind of end up with a person who has a depression that manifests in constant negative thoughts, like constantly just kill yourself. Why the hell are you still alive? You stupid asshole, stop fucking up, just kill yourself already. Just on and on and on. And then at night I would just lie awake worrying about death. Like, I don't know why. I didn't want that. It just happened. Nothing I could do about it. So I'd just be kind of lying next to my wife and she'd be like, you're right. Like, yeah, it's the usual, maybe like, like tell me what's on your mind so I can kind of focus on that and fall asleep. And I just figured, well, that's just what it is. That's never going to get any better. And what I eventually, I tried Buddhism for a number of years, Western Buddhism mostly, and some Zen Buddhism. Didn't really help.
What I'm curious. Yeah, sorry if I can jump in. What was the appeal to Buddhism? What was it that drew you into Western and Zen Buddhism?
I don't know. I think I read something online, and I picked up a book at the bookstore. I picked up Buddhism Isn't What You Think by Steve Hagen, which is very practical Western Buddhism. But I think what appealed to me is that it basically confirmed what I knew, that life was suffering.
Right.
But it also kind of just, here's the solution. The solution is to follow the Eightfold Path and reach enlightenment, basically to extinguish yourself. I tried to make that work. I tried to meditate often. I think I had little amounts of progress where sometimes I could kind of see clearer. I was diagnosed with ADD, which I think manifested as some sort of fog that's always in your head, like you're always kind of distracted. And sometimes I could see this clarity after regular amounts of meditation. So I knew there was like a different state maybe that I could sometimes attain.
Right.
Anyway, after copious of amounts of Buddhism books, I eventually let that go. And I don't know how old I was then. I got busy with other jobs. I moved houses, became a firefighter, volunteer in my village. I moved to a new village, wanted to get to know people. So I said, hey, do you need people? And they did. So I became a firefighter. I've been on Fontaine for 11 years now. I moved to a very religious village. There's like 12 churches here at least. There's like 3 in my street. And one of the first questions they asked me at the fire department was which church I went to. I said, well, I don't. But they asked me that right away. Like, boom, who are you? Which church you go to? Well, I don't go to church. Well, where do you get your morals? I said, well, Matthew says that you shouldn't judge me about that. And so they're, oh, he's okay. He knows his Bible. And I mean, I did know my Bible.
Yeah.
I paid attention, but, you know, to a degree, I knew my Bible. Not like a pastor, but I kind of knew what was in there here and there. So eventually I ran into Stoicism. That appealed to me. I started reading Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus and Rufus, and one of those newer guys who writes these sort of self-help books. They're not that good. Holiday is his name, I think. What I liked about it is that it focuses on virtuous living and focusing on what you do. Like, just focus on the action. I'm thinking if I just focus on what my next action is, maybe I can keep the other stuff at bay.
Yeah.
Because that kind of always manifested here in my head as this like nasty dark thing. It's really weird how it had a location.
Right. It's a very disciplined way of living, right? I mean, it's all about self-mastery and sort of repressing your urges and but it's
and realizing what you can't influence.
Right. Accepting what you can't change. It's interesting. I because if you read like Aurelius's Meditations, you know, there's a piece in there, and I bring this up because it kind of resonates with something you said earlier, which is I forget exactly how he phrases it, but something along the lines of, you know, it's okay to be sort of holding your crying baby and telling him at the same time that this world is all there is and it's a lot of suffering and you just have to sort of accept it. And then the way to overcome that is like you're saying, the self-discipline and just be strong, rise above the pain and despair of this world, really, and, you know, focus on living a reasonably, you know, productive life in spite of all of that, which sounds a little bit like kind of where you came from in a way, like that earlier mindset that you were describing.
I never realized that. Yeah, that is interesting. But it's very much a tough love. You know, like you have 2 choices. Either you keep on in your Sisyphean shit life, or you kill yourself. So
right, exactly.
And I had read references to Camus, but I hadn't read the man himself. But you know, that also life's just absurd. You know, what's the bloody point? So Stoicism appealed to me. I really tried to live that. I listened to a podcast by a guy. It's called Stoic Mettle, METTLE, and this is a guy who runs his own farm in Canada, I think, and he makes all videos on YouTube. Very interesting character. I should invite him to a Discord. And he appealed to me because he was kind of trying to live that virtuous life that way. And I started looking for more content. So at some point I was sitting at work as a computer programmer. And I have to say, by that time I was doing quite well. I was a freelance software developer with a good rate and a stable job and a firefighter and a loving wife and nice house. I had everything, but I would be sitting after training in the fire department at the bar and everybody's having fun. And I'm just trying to ignore the thoughts that I should kill myself, even though, you know, it's all going great, but you have no control over it. It's just, it's beyond me, no matter how the discipline, because it's so much a part of me. So I was like, oh, what the hell I'm going to do with this? So I'd come home and your wife asks, how are you? I'm like, mixed, you know, it was great, but I wasn't doing well.
Yeah.
So I was sitting at work and I figured I might as well just watch a video. So I Google like virtue ethics on YouTube. I search virtue on YouTube. And I get this video first hit by The Necessity of Virtue, old lecture by Jordan Peterson. And I'd never heard of the guy. So I click it, and like 45 minutes just blows my mind. Because it's older, you know, you can see he's still young, kind of chubby, squeaky. And like, who is this guy? And he talks about virtue and evil and Solzhenitsyn, and suddenly there's boom, Cain and Abel. I'm like, what the hell is this? And he shows how, you know, Cain has resentment, and he allows life and suffering to turn him into resentment and kill his brother, and then get mad at God as well. Like he doesn't contend with reality properly, as Peterson would say. And I'm watching it and like trying to work still. Like, oh, wow. So I come home and like, we're gonna have dinner. We have to watch this. I told my friend, we have to watch this guy. So we watch him, and I'm like, what do you think? She's like, yeah, he's interesting. So, you know, of course, there you go to the Peterson rabbit hole. You're just lost. And so I started watching more of his lectures, his university lectures. And of course, I hit the biblical series. And he talks about the idea of God. And it's like, you know, a good hour and a half. And I'm just blown away by these ideas he has. Like, I hadn't, like, this is religion too? This is useful. And the way, of course, Peterson portrays it in sort of a scientific, rational way. You know, it appeals to people like me.
Right.
We think about like abstractly, and so I started visiting the Jordan Peterson subreddit, which nowadays is not really worth visiting anymore. But back in the day, it was pretty good. There was a decent community there. And one of the times, somebody posted a link to Paul van der Klee's video where he reviewed Harris and Peterson debates with the Weinstein moderating. Now, there were a couple of things going on, and I still don't know where they correlate. One thing that was going on is I had been experimenting with my diet. I had been playing with the ketogenic diet. I don't know. Oh, no, that's not true. Hang on. Backtrack. My wife had been experimenting with fasting. She has a medical background, and she was trying to figure out how it affected her sugar level and her blood pressure. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to fast a week. Do you want to join?" I said, "Sure." So I started fasting, and I noticed that a couple of days in, this was silent.
Really?
And yeah, it was gone. I woke up like, hello? Because there was just nothing there. There was audible silence. And I tell my wife, and like, it's quiet up there. And I had that once before in my life for 4 days after I reverted, which was actually a catalyst for me to go to a therapist, because I knew there was a different way of living. There was 4 days of silence, and like I felt great. And I remember telling my wife, like, I don't know what this is, and I hope it stays. And then after 4 days, it went back.
Yeah.
So I had that same thing, and like, that's interesting. And I noticed my intestinal problems that I tended to have were also gone, which I won't go into detail, but you know, they weren't fun.
Yeah.
And I just figured that's life, you know. Yeah. But those were gone. Gone. And like, whoa, wow, okay, you know. And my wife was also very happy, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So I fasted the entire week, and my wife's been reading about the ketogenic diet, and you know, she said maybe that has to do with it. So I picked that up, and that's been keeping me extremely stable. But what also happened is during that week, I watched that video by Paul van der Klee. And I remember Paul talking about the axiomatic God. And this is going to sound weird, but I knew exactly where I was sitting. I was sitting on a couch on the other side of this room, and I was watching the TV. And I sort of noticed as I was listening to Paul talking about the axiomatic God, the God, the one, the God that the structure of all structures, that something in me shifted. And I was thinking that I understand what that God is. And I understand why they would want me to live a certain way. Like Weinstein says to Harris, like, I understand this God that Peterson talks about. Yeah, I do too. I get this. Wow. Wow, that's interesting. So I know that got all sorts of stuff going in my brain. And I remember telling my wife, like, I don't know. I mean, this is odd. And another thing that correlates with this is I had been having fire training in the church in my village. And afterwards we had the evaluation in the church itself. So we all sat in the pews, and we listened to the evaluation of, oh, you did this well, and you did this well, and this could have been better. And I remember sitting there like, there's something here that I forgot was here. And that's interesting. It kind of feels good sitting here. That's odd. And so that'd been kind of sitting on my mind. And the same evening after training, my neighbor 2 houses down, who I consider a good friend, said, "Hey, I'm being admitted as an elder in my church. Would you like to come?" I said, "Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because I'd been thinking about maybe trying back at church." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I guess you don't want to because you think you'd be like betraying your rationality." I said, "Yeah, exactly." He knows me. And so that was really interesting how all these things came together. And then I was talking to my wife, and she's like, "Well, why don't you, I said, am I still rational? What's going on?" She's my anchor in that regard. I don't know if I want to be dealing with all this. I'm kind of used to my atheism. And she's like, "You're doing great. Why not just try it? Why don't you try pray?" I'm not going to pray. That's ridiculous. So, and I said, I think I'd like to talk to this Paul. So I sent Paul an email. Like, "Hey, would you like to have a conversation?" And he said, "Sure." And that's how my first conversation with Paul happened, which was a bit similar to the one I'm having with you.
Yeah.
But then I hadn't really noticed that fasting and diet correlation all that strong. So I'm bringing that up now because I don't want to forget. I've been eating ketonic for about 2 years now, ketogenic. Let's see. So I had a conversation with Paul, and Paul just said, "Well, why don't you try out a church? Just pick one and go with it. Just keep going. That's what matters. Why don't you want to pray?" Like, well, it's for praying people. I don't want to be a person who prays. I don't want to be a person who goes to church. Which basically I was saying I don't respect the people who do that, which I was aware of. But I wasn't going to lie. So I figured, okay, you know what? I'll try the church thing. So I told my wife I'm going to try out the church on the street in the tradition that I was brought up in. I figured at least I know that. And I went in, and I didn't combust into flames. And I took a seat in the back, and my wife went with me, and she's been going with me ever since. She said at first it was to support me, but now she goes if I don't go because I'm at a conference or something. So,
right.
So it sucked. The first time I went, it sucked. The hymns were just the dweeping of God, and then these evangelical songs. And the sermon was weak. Like, where's my Peterson style sermon? Come on, give me some depth here. I'm going to be honest. I just like, well, no. And I went another time and another time. And then I said, no, not going. Not going anymore. Nope. And that didn't help at all. I actually reverted back into my old mind state. And I'm careful to make correlations that are suggestive because I was also tweaking my diet. I was trying to figure out if I could maybe still eat, because I brewed beer for a hobby. I loved making bread. I loved making all sorts of Indonesian food with rice. And I really loved going with cooking, and it's like, oh, maybe I can just, but it doesn't seem to be. As soon as I eat like rice for 3 days, I can notice my mind going back to its old patterns. So I actually decided, you know what, maybe there's something to church, and I'll go back. And people start to recognize you. Like, oh, hey, we've been seeing you two for a while. How are you doing? How do you like the church? And you kind of start making conversation. And you notice that a lot of these people also don't really know what they believe. And they're kind of trying to figure stuff out. And they have doubts and questions. And we had a new pastor who was just really nice. And I said, hey, would you like to come over for coffee? And he came over for coffee, and we ended up just talking for 4 hours about meaning and religion. And he says, you're trying to get to God rationally. It's not going to happen. He's going to come in through another window. Stop trying that. It's not going to work. And he's just a very likable pastor. And that's where that kind of started. I mean, this was about a year ago, I think, maybe a bit longer. I joined a sort of a church study group from another church where I was invited by a firefighter who goes there. That's a lot stricter, a lot more conservative. Like, Noah's flood actually happened, and Abraham and Isaac wasn't a story to explain that our faith doesn't sacrifice infants to Molech. And no, it all really happens, all very literal. But they like having me there because I tend to ask questions that they think are interesting. And of course they think, oh, I'm clearly it's just a matter of time before I get to God. And clearly I already believe. And then I say, no, and you don't get to tell me I believe, because I don't.
Yeah.
But to kind of try to decrease the amount of rambling here, I had 3 conversations with Paul. My second one is really where I started to figure out how incredibly well I was doing, because I was able to function on a whole different level. I was able to read books without being distracted by my mind, able to think and write software at a way more productive level. I was happier. My relationship, my marriage was way better. Not that it was bad, but I was just happy. And I figured, well, if this is what it takes, fuck it, I'll take it. I don't care if it's not true. I mean, because, well, what else is there? I know where I'm coming from. I know what that has to offer. So why don't I just keep trying this? So I'll try praying, and I'll read more books about religion, and I'll talk with my pastor more, and church members start to invite me over for dinner, and we would have these great conversations. And I noticed, like, this is that community I wanted, that's been there all that time, and I didn't know. And I started to look forward to go to church. And, people would greet me on the street who I now knew from church too.
At this point, were you still with that first church that you were attending, or were you with that second, more conservative, traditional one?
No, the conservative one I only freeload for the church study.
Oh,
and then,
okay.
No, I'm still going to my more liberal one.
Yeah.
And I really struggled with wanting to become a member, but not feeling I was allowed to. And I really struggled with not allowing myself to take communion, because I figured, if I do this, I'm going to take it extremely seriously. I'm going to act as much as I can. I'm going to act as if God exists. I'm going to act as if Jesus existed. Well, I mean, Jesus existed, but I'm going to act as if he was God. And okay, I can't go any further, but I'll see what that does. It's been nothing but good. And once I realized that, like, fine, all right, I'll keep doing this. And I would check with my wife once in a while, like, is this not kind of a mania? Am I doing all right? She's like, yeah, you're fine, you're doing great. Awesome. Eventually, I started telling my parents who were just kind of like, okay, well, we always figured either you or your younger brother would become very religious. It's going to be you. But my parents were just happy that they knew me as their son who always had trouble. So they were really happy. And my dad came with me to church, and my dad invited me to come to church. So I went in my old hometown to church, and the people there were like, "Is that Job? What's he doing here?" And that was really nice because I got to meet all these people I hadn't seen in years.
Yeah.
So I didn't take communion, still don't. But eventually I woke up in the morning on a Sunday before going to church, and I didn't have that problem with becoming a member. So I talked it over with my wife, and I said, I've been going for a year now. I'd like to contribute to this place. I want to become a member. I want to just take that step. So I did. And now we're members of the church. And I noticed I was still very cagey about it, like embarrassed about it. Because I was never supposed to become religious, Rob. That's an important part. That was for other people, not for me.
Right.
I was the last person. And it was really strange to notice that I started to just really bite myself into religion, like really dig down and by Paul's suggestion, start reading Lewis. I started reading the Gospels. My wife and I started to read the Gospels together. Like she would do Matthew and Mark and Matthew. I would read Luke and John, and we'd compare notes. And we'd make jokes about, how the apostles just wouldn't understand things, and how Jesus is just constantly throwing shade at the Pharisees every chance he gets.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to be reading the Bible and just laughing and trying to imitate. What's Jesus talking about now? We just don't get it. What's he talking about with his sheep and his goats and the sheep in the gate and the wine branch and it's not like I didn't know those stories, but you get to look at them since you've been 12.
Right.
And my wife hadn't had a religious background at all, so she got to experience it for the first time. I remember being in church and we did the Apostles' Creed.
Yep.
And I just noticed that my brain is like, oh yeah, hang on, how did that go again? And I'm just slowly kind of murmuring along as my brain is loading the old lines, and my wife's just looking at me like, how do you know these words? Like, yeah, I had to memorize them as a kid. So
let me ask you, because I'm curious about kind of a thread that I see going back to when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, and you want to do a school report on dinosaurs, and the school says no, because that's that challenges the sort of the religious understanding, and then to Jordan Peterson and even to now, one of the it's not a conflict, but maybe it's a tension between rationality and faith. And I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on how those two things fit together, or if they do fit together. Does a Christian have to let go of some sense of rationality, or do we need both, or what? What do you think?
I think rationality and faith aren't exclusive, but the term rationality is too broad.
Okay.
I've come to realize that people can live their faith extremely rationally, which may sound weird, but to them, it's like the most rational thing they can do. Because if you believe that God exists and that Jesus was the Son of God, like, why wouldn't you? It makes perfect sense.
Right.
It's just that, if you don't have that faith, it just looks, depending on how you yourself look at faith, it might look very strange. You're like, well, that's just that thing. Now, through Peterson, I've come to understand that humans seem to be a very religious creature.
Mm-hmm.
And Peterson always also helped me to kind of, there's the word again, rationalize to myself that I can use religion as a utility. I basically use it as a therapy. I mean, I noticed that I act as if, and I'm just doing great. Like I pray every evening, I pray extremely sincerely to God. I mean, I even pray for people who I think could use a prayer.
Yeah.
I don't know where that goes. Like, you know what Peterson says, you sit on the side of your bed and you're just serious. So I think what I'm doing right now is as rational as I can be, because I'm doing what I can to stay where I am or get better than I am now.
Right.
So.
Well, and it occurs to me too that for Christianity to be, we'd say worth its salt, for Christianity to be, to have any merit or worth, it can't, at the very least, it can't contradict reason. Does that make sense? Because if it violates reason in some way, then that's a real problem for belief, then, I would say.
Now, so there's an interesting thing about that. So I told you I've been kind of really cagey about this.
Mm-hmm.
And after I had met with you and Paul and John, I went to the actual conference where I was supposed to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And I meet with a guy there who's an art developer, and we go back a couple of years. And he's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And we chit chat. And he says, "So, how long you been in the States?" And I said, "Oh, since Wednesday." And this was on a Monday, I think, the Monday after that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Oh, you've been here for a while." And I said, "Yeah, I was hanging out with some pastors." And he's like, "Oh, so you're very religious." I'm like, "Well, not exactly." But I'd been reading Kierkegaard on the plane, and I'd been reading Tolstoy. And I said, he says, "So what's your belief?" And I said, "Well, I try to have a relationship with the infinite, and I try to formulate that by the greatest commandment, which love God with all your heart and all your mind, and there's one more that I forget, and to love your neighbor as yourself."
Mm-hmm.
And in John, and I used to know the verse, but I forgot. But he said, Jesus says, "Well, when are you guys going to rat me out?
Mm-hmm.
And I will be gone. But once I'm gone, this is what I tell you: love each other." And I said, those three things is to me what I believe. I think acting out of that is the best thing one can do. Mm-hmm. And he just, "Oh no, you're like that religious. That's okay." Because this guy is very, very left wing. He's a great guy, but he's very left wing. I mean, the moment he heard, because we were talking, he has ADD and he struggled with depression. So I said, "Oh, I've actually been listening to this psychologist, and it's really helped me." He says, "Oh, who?" I said, "Jordan Peterson." He's like, "What? Jordan Peterson? You?" I'm like, yeah. And he was just, he was like, he didn't know what to do with that.
Right.
Because to him, I was like him, European software developer, smart, working in digital accessibility. Like, clearly I was supposed to be very left, which, I think I'm fairly left. But I mean, he just couldn't make sense of the fact that I would have enjoyed Peterson. I said, well, think about it. Maybe your idea of Peterson is wrong, given how helpful he's obviously been to me, right. And that, I'm still the same person that you knew, apart from some things you didn't know about that you know now. And I noticed that every time I have a discussion with somebody, did you watch my conversation with Paul and Rod and John?
I watched about half of it. Yeah, I didn't get around to finishing it, but yeah, I did see about half of that one.
At some point, I talked to somebody where, he's very left, very woke. He's like very proud of how woke he is, which is the thing he says. I'm not making fun of him.
Right.
He calls himself the wokest of the woke, which is fine. I mean, he's a really great guy. He tries really hard. He says, "Oh, Joe, we're assholes. We're all assholes." I said, "I know. I'm Calvinist. I get it." And so I was kind of trying at that point to figure out, where do I stand? What can I adopt for myself that I feel comfortable with? I wasn't trying to give myself an identity, but I was trying to figure out what to do with these things I was trying to figure out. So later he said, what does that mean when you said that? I said, well, I did the same. I said the same thing. I'm trying to have a relation with the infinite, etc. And he says, oh, okay, yeah, no, you're not some Bible thumper. And I noticed as soon as people find out that I'm religious, then they think you're a Bible thumper, which is interesting. And as soon as I explain my motivations, it makes perfect sense to them, because it's basically Buddhism.
Yeah.
Well, not really.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because again, you mentioned way early on in our conversation, you talked about the Bible Belt, and I assume you were talking about in Holland. Mm-hmm. And of course, in the United States, the Bible Belt, we refer to the Bible Belt as well, and it's usually Midwest United States down on through the South, and of course that's almost a pejorative term. We say that in a way that says, oh, that's just those, they're either they're pretty ignorant on a lot of things, except for they like to throw their beliefs in the face of other people, and it focuses, they're usually very focused on morality. They want to tell you how to live, and so we don't really need anything to do with that. But then what you're getting at is that you're seeing Christianity as obviously something bigger than that. It's this, at least I think, I don't want to be putting words into your mouth, but I'm hearing that this relationship with the infinite, this sort of realization of the transcendent, that the world is bigger than just the material world that we can see and touch and taste and experience right in front of us. So yeah.
Now, there's a couple of things I think I should mention that are relevant here, regarding that Christianity is bigger than that. Since my mind is stable, I've been able to project an existence further that's not just a couple of months. Like, first off, I never expected to reach 30. But now I would love to live another 20 years, which is not something I could ever imagine I'd be able to do. Like I can just think about living for a long time. Like, I used to just hate looking in a mirror. Who wants to live,
Right,
so
right.
That allows me to also think about what a proper existence needs to be outside of just working in order to feed yourself. What I found in Christianity and in church, and I'm not sure if this is a direct correlation, is I found a community of people who share a common narrative, which is why churches work. They still differ, and the beautiful thing about a church is you don't pick the people there, and they don't pick you.
Yeah.
But you're together.
Yeah.
And you sing the hymns together, which is quite powerful once you get used to the hymns, which some of them I quite like now.
Yeah.
And you get to have these discussions with each other. And I've had really emotional interactions with people who were just, I talked about that in my convo with the other three pastors. And like, there was Mary, who was just crying about how her husband died. And all I can do is just hold her. And I think that's what Christianity is at its core, is the being near the other. And that's your neighbor, and that's the best thing you can do, is to be there for the other. Now, thinking from that perspective, from that frame, as Paul would say, is that you start to look at existence a whole different way. So I noticed I've become very interested in people and what they are doing, or what drives them, and to interact with them and to help them out. And I don't know if that is because I'm no longer depressed. I don't know if that is because I'm going to church, or because I've started to explore the Christian ethic in a serious manner. It could be a combination of all the things. I really don't know. And at this point, I can't verify anymore, because I don't want to do away with any of it. So when people wonder if you're religious, there are those religious people who feel that they need to portray their morality on other people. But at its core, the morality of Christianity is very simple. You can read that back in Paul. So at some point I had this sort of realization that So Peterson says that you should speak the truth. Yeah. And eventually I thought about that a lot. And I figured that is true. I think that is the most fundamental thing, that you speak the truth. Because if you speak the truth, you bring the proper world into being, as Peterson says, and you just live the proper existence. I was working through that, and somebody told me, I don't know who, they said, well, no, you're thinking too low resolution. It's love. You should read Galatians, because if you work out of love, you will speak the truth. And I'm thinking, they're right. They're absolutely right. It's love first. Well, and then if God is love, well, now it all makes sense.
Yeah.
If God is love, then if I act out of love, then I'm acting out of the way God would want me to act. But I mean, that changes a lot.
Yeah.
That is absolutely fundamental. And I'm still kind of working through that, because it is very difficult. But it also seems, as soon as I do that, everything gets better, because you're in line with yourself and you're being the best possible person you can be to other people.
Well, it occurs to me, and again, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it occurs to me that one of the things that happened here is that you turned from being more inward to being outward. I mean, in other words, when you're struggling with all these thoughts in your mind, that's one of the results of that, is that it's hard to break away, I think, from all those thoughts long enough to actually be invested in the welfare of other people. It's not that you want to, right? It's not that
I was always stuck here, always.
Right.
No, you're spot on. I knew that, but I couldn't break out. Like the ADD keeps you in here as well.
And I want to be clear too, that it's not that a person is intentionally self-centered, because people that struggle with depression or anxiety or other such things, that's, it can sound like I'm saying to them, well, you're just a self-centered person, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it's because of the condition, it's hard to get beyond that. And so, from a series of events and all of these kind of changes in your thinking, it seems like what has happened is you've been able to break away from that, so that you're then able to focus on others. And as you step into that, you're stepping into what is, like I think you've said it very well, it becomes the Christian ethic of loving God and loving others. And then you're sort of stepping more into line with how we're designed, right? I mean, that's the Christian faith would say, this is how we're created for this. And when you live in step with how you're created, it actually, it ends up being a very positive thing for a person.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, Peterson would say, like, well, you've been crawling out of hell, and you're finally able to sort of express yourself. But yeah, you're spot. I was always in this sort of fog of distraction and negativity that I couldn't break out of. I mean, sometimes it'd be so bad I couldn't focus on anything.
Yeah.
I couldn't get any work done. I'd be worried to drive a car because my mind would just zone constantly.
Right.
And beyond my control. I mean, I remember being a kid, and there would be the dinner conversation. I would always be somewhere else, and then my family would get mad at me because I wouldn't have heard anything, and then I wouldn't know what was going on. Which I can't fault them for it. I was old, but I couldn't help it either.
Yeah, right.
So I don't think I have developed things further than this. What I have noticed is, last week I noticed I was going through a week fast, trying to see if another set of fasting would maybe bring me something new. And I wondered how it would affect my prayer. And what I noticed, that at some point I was kind of thinking about things, and I noticed, okay, I would definitely prefer living in a world where God exists and Jesus rose from the dead than a world where he didn't. Now that's new, because I used to not want to live in a world where God exists. But if Jesus rose, that's a great thing. That changes everything.
Yeah.
That makes everything meaningful. And and wonderful, but also terrible, but also full of hope and potential glory. And so I'm still kind of trying to work through what that means.
Yeah.
But what I have noticed is that I am utterly unable to believe in God and to believe that Jesus rose. I am simply unable to do that. And
and I've talked to others too, and that ends up kind of being their line in the sand, right? And I guess for Christians, if you've been raised in the church, you've been taught the resurrection and that since you're a real little kid, and so you almost just take for granted how remarkable a claim that really is, right? To say that someone died and came back to life, that's an astonishing claim to make. And so is that the hang up?
To be clear, I've read a number of books on the subject. I can't think of them. I read Cold Case Christianity. Can We Trust the Gospels? Books by Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
Books by I read lectures by Habermas.
Mm-hmm.
I went through 3 lecture series by Peter Kreeft. I love that guy. He's great. I read the book by Justin Brearley, and probably other books I'm forgetting right now. And it looks like it happened. Mm-hmm. It really does look like it happened. I can't believe it. I can't. I'm unable to.
What is it that makes your mind stop short? I'm just curious.
I don't know. People don't rise from the dead. They don't.
Yeah.
So, and I know I have this dogma. I've identified that like half a year ago because I was kind of discussing this with my wife, and I said, if somebody gave me watertight proof that it happened, I still wouldn't believe them. Yeah. Because people don't come back from the dead. Period. Doesn't happen.
Right.
And it's not like I'm doing that to be edgy or because I don't. No. I mean, I've prayed sincerely for insight or change or like, please, God, Jesus, I would like to have that, but I can't. Right. I simply can't.
Right.
And maybe I will someday.
Well, and that's why I said what I did, is because a lot of people in my circles will just say, well, why not? Why can't? And I'm reinforcing, I think, why, or I'm trying to just draw attention to the fact that this is the Christian claim, and it, in a lot of ways, right? The Christian faith hinges on the resurrection, and it's a shocking thing to believe. And I think, as from my vantage point, we ought not to just rush past that so quickly. We need to appreciate, really, because like you say, it's a life-changing, history-changing event. Now, it's also not something that's really easy to believe if you're not exposed to that, if that makes sense. I guess that's just kind of my observation.
Well, but I have been exposed to it, but I think my history built into me such a resentment for existence that even though I love it now, even though I'm not sure yet what to do with it, like today I'm done eating and I take out the tablecloth to kind of shake it out outside, and I look at the sky and there's clouds and it's nice, sun's going down. I'm thinking, isn't it absolutely mind-shattering to consider that there's a point to that's being created instead of, well, who knows?
Yeah.
And but I can't get there. I can't. It's simply unobtainable. Well, but like my pastor tells me, Job, you believe. People at church club tell me, Job, you believe. Somebody else, people on the disco tell me, oh, Job, you believe. And how often do I have to keep saying that? Yeah, but you act like you do. Exactly. And I'm very serious about that.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing that I would just kind of throw into the mix, because, at least Christianity at least most strands of it, I guess I shouldn't speak for all, but sort of operate under the assumption that faith itself is not something that you come up with on your own, right? It's something that God gives us. And so, like you're saying, maybe you get there someday, but in the meantime, okay, this is where you are. So, okay, fine. And live as though it works, live as though it makes sense. And as for the rest, okay, let that happen in its own time. And yeah, I mean, you're right. People they can tell you, you're a believer all you want, but if you're not yet, you're not yet. And that's just how it is.
Yeah. And all I can say is that as long as I act like a Christian, as act as if God exists, and as if, and it doesn't seem to conflict. Like I have some cognitive dissonance, but as long as I tell myself, well, it's for therapeutic reasons, it's fine.
Yeah.
And it works. And so I've been very clear to my pastor about this. Like I said, I won't take part in communion. I will not. And he's okay with that. He says, fine, I'm not going to tell you that, if you don't start to believe in 3 weeks, So,
well, I think, speaking as a pastor, you're the kind of parishioner that I would just really love having at a church member, because, you're honest and you're straight up front about the challenges that Christianity brings, but also you see the power in it, I think, or the potential. I mean, how it is a life-changing thing.
So I've been working with my pastor on a ministry. I approached him about that. I said, hey, there have to be more like me.
Yeah.
And because so the reason I started thinking about that is I had this woke person I was talking to who said we're all assholes. I had such an emotional conversation with him where he just cried, and all I could do was just hold him. And I would tell him advice. I would give him advice to questions he had, and says, "Oh, all the things you're saying are so true." I'm thinking to myself, I've quoted like 3 different Bible books that you do, and some Peterson, but and I'm thinking this guy would be the last guy to come with me to church. He would never come to church with me, even though in there he might find something he would really like, because that's what I did. So I figured there's got to be more like me, who maybe I can reach. And so I said to my pastor, could I do something like an out of court ministry? And I told him about the Discord server that we're on, where I have conversations with people and they tell me their story, like similarly how I do to you. It's just kind of a new, I'm not used to do that anymore. But I said, how about we do a church podcast? I interview members from the church. I ask them, what brings you here? They talk for an hour. That's it. We publish those. And then we do with you as well, where we do proper epistemology and theology, kind of like Bishop Barron's Word on Fire.
Yeah.
And he was so enthusiastic. He's like, I love that. That fulfills the church's missionary task. Let us write. We will write up a proposal, you and me, and we'll submit it to church council. And last Saturday, it got approved.
Wow.
So now I'm the podcast pastor. And in January, we're going to get started, and we're going to see how that goes. And it's especially to reach younger people. We've made our case that young people, they listen to loads of podcasts.
Yep.
I have come to experience faith through basically new media, and podcasts, and so that's happening now. And I actually managed to tweet about it, which I felt very proud of. It's like, oh God, so I'll tell you this. I was at a conference Thursday. I was emceeing a speaker event. The after the real conference, there's like a lightning talk, 10-minute talk event, kind of fun, nonchalant with drinks. I was emceeing that. I'd made every speaker a custom introductory limerick, but one of the speakers comes to me, and we're friends. We talk to each other online, although we don't meet that often. But he says, "Hey, are you going to church?" I said, "Yeah, for a while now." And I kind of explained that I've been going for a year and a half. And he says, "Oh, well, I've been thinking of doing that because I'm kind of looking for like a community like that." And I'm like, "Oh, whoa, you and me should talk." And I'm like, see, that is what I want. And that happened because I wasn't chicken shit enough to tweet that I'm, Christ curious.
Right. Huh.
I hope to at some point I can really be just open about it, that I'm doing this, and that's getting better and better as I sort of kind of get like, well, I'm doing this and who cares? It's good for me, and I don't care what anybody thinks. I mean, I'm kind of worried, like if I manage to believe it, I don't know what that will do to me, because that is just so absolutely, that shatters everything. Like suddenly there's not only a point to everything, but it's like this weird, because it brings up more questions. But then why this? Then why that? Then why that? And you go into the apologetic black hole. I actually just bought the book Letters to a Skeptic, or Letters from a Skeptic by Greg Boyd, where he is back and forth with his father, and his father is a skeptic. I'm kind of looking forward to read that, because apparently it's like real intimate exchange of letters. Well, and then there's the Discord server with like almost 500 members now, and it's so. Rob, I just had an hour-long conversation with a person who suffered for migraines that would last for 3 days, and it was ruining his life. And he managed it. He managed to fix it mostly with a ketogenic diet, and he has a great relationship with the local Greek Orthodox Church now. He's married. He's got a daughter. I mean, I got emotional halfway during listening to that, and I fully understood why Peterson says he gets emotional when people come up to him and say, my life's so much better now, because it's so beautiful to see that. And the whole existential part of humanity is just, it's endless. There's so much of it, and I don't know what I'm all going to do in this church, but it's yes, Kat, it is so. I don't know, Rob. I got no words. It's been a really strange 2 years.
Well, you know what, and this is, I think, just a good point to wind it down, because your story is, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I just so enjoy hearing it, and just hearing the journey that you've been on, and the future in that way is kind of wide open, right? Who knows what it looks like from going from here, but you're involved in some really neat things, and if, by the way, if you send me a link to the podcast, I'll put a link to it in the video. But I just want to thank you for opening up and sharing, and for telling your story. It's a great, it reflects a lot of questions that I think many people have and have wrestled with. And I think you're seeing that, because other people, as they come to you and say, hey, I need this sense of community too. And so your story resonates, and those, wrestling resonates, I think, with a lot of people. And so I thank you for sharing. And I hope we can keep up the conversation and keep in touch, and keep talking. So thank you. A couple of quick things. I've got some videos coming up in the next probably the next month or two, including an interview with best-selling author Julia Shears has agreed to come on, and we've got that scheduled for early November, as well as a Christian sex therapist. And so stay tuned for that. That'll be in the next month or so as well. So we've got a few other things coming up on the channel. But Job, thank you again for being part of this conversation. I really enjoyed it, and really appreciate you coming on today.
My pleasure. I feel like I talk too much.
No. This was all about you, man. It was good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit stop, and thank you again.